Hello and welcome to COVID Conversations here on WNCU 90.7 FM, streaming on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Instagram. I'm your host, Kimberley Pierce Cartwright. I'm the News and Public Affairs Director here at WNCU 90.7 FM, and we're using the Zoom platform as always to talk about how COVID-19 is affecting our world. Dr. Ingrid Wicker-McCree, North Carolina Central University Athletic Director, is my guest today. And we'll talk about the rigors of her job and how she's led her division at North Carolina Central through COVID-19 so far. Hello and welcome, Dr. Ingrid Wicker-McCree. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Good. North Carolina Central University athletics is a central part of the university. Talk to me about how many years you've worked in athletics and how many years have you led athletics? Two different things, right?
Yes. So I have been in college athletics since basically, really, if you count the undergraduate years when I was at George Washington University playing volleyball. I also had a part-time job in the gym. At this front door where patrons would come in. I also worked the gymnastics meets in terms of game day operations that led to me being the score clock keeper for basketball. And so basically I've been in athletics for a very long time, but as a full-time staff member for 31 years at 3 different institutions. At North Carolina Central, I've been here for 28 years. I started off as coaching volleyball, softball, teaching, compliance, and now I've led the program as athletic director for 14 years.
Amazing. So how many women athletic directors do you know in the country?
So there are about 59 Black men and women that are Division I athletic directors. And out of that group, I believe it is 4 or 5 of us now. And it keeps changing, monthly. And then total, there are more in Division II and Division III. And now more in NAIA. But it's less than 2% that are Black women that are in the NCAA Division I, II, and III out of 1,108 something schools.
Man, so that makes you very unique in this business. I want to talk about now your responsibility during the pandemic has been to guide your program through this pandemic that we have. Now, how many athletes does that include?
So for the past, almost 3 years now during the pandemic, we've had anywhere from 302 to 332 student athletes, over the course of the pandemic. But we can't forget about the staff and coaches. That's an additional 80 employees that are under the athletics umbrella, that had to meet more stringent requirements based on the CDC, university, the state of North Carolina, Durham, the NCAA and MEAC guidelines. So we had a lot of different rules and regulations and guidelines that governed our athletics program.
How do you keep track of all that? Do you have a scoreboard? Do you have like a spreadsheet somewhere that issues all the rulings? And then, how do you work through all of that to make it make sense?
So luckily, our conference office has done a great job of keeping us updated. And so they have provided some spreadsheets that'll say, here are the NCAA rules, here are the MEAC rules. We have our own spreadsheets. In fact, one of our staff members, George Bulldog Smith, along with his counterparts from the UNC system office, every Monday, and now they meet every other Monday, but every Monday during the pandemic, they all met via Zoom. And they talked about all the different requirements, what's coming on the horizon, best practices. And so none of us created any of these, guidelines and best practices on our own. It was a true spirit of collaboration amongst our peers in the UNC system, amongst our peers in the MEAC. And so you really saw people come together, more so than ever.
So talk to me about when you first heard about COVID-19 and then you first realized that your division would be very much influenced by what happens with the pandemic, how to fight against the pandemic. What were you thinking? Did your mind explode?
It exploded because I was actually, our women's basketball team had just won and was going to make it to, I believe, the semifinals. We were in a meeting and we were actually sitting together with the presidents and chancellors and ADs, and slowly, conference by conference was counseling, and it was coming up on all of our phones. And so when we made that decision to cancel the remainder of the tournament, it was just, disbelief, fear, frustration, sadness, because the fear of people losing their lives, which they did. It was just an unknown. And so I'm probably not alone in all of that and how I was feeling at that time. But in athletics, you don't have a lot of time to feel anything. You have to kind of get with it and say, hey, we got to get a plan. So the first thing was coming back, school closed. What do we do with the athletes, and this is such a part of their identity. They've been playing their sport since 4 or 5 years old. And so now even that fear of how do we deal and handle the mental health and wellness, of these student athletes, because now this has been taken away from them. And we have no idea at that time when they were going to get back on the field of play. And so it was just a period of, just disbelief, how did we get here? But hey, we're here. We got to pray about it, and then we got to move forward.
So you mentioned the students and then their mental health. So you got 300 plus students, and all of them are in a state of flux, really trying to determine what's going to come next in their lives, in their studies, in their possible careers. So how did you manage that to work through and help them through this situation with hope for the future for their sport?
So we really had to lean upon our Student Health Counseling Center, Dr. Moore, Mr. Hitt. We also work with one of our sponsors, Mandrake Lewis and his company, Quality Care Solutions. We were pulling from resources all over and anywhere that we could, talking to parents, asking them to help us with their sons and daughters, because the mental health aspect of it was just true. It was right there in our faces. And, as a staff, several years ago, we did mental health certification, first aid, which is just, the very basics, but we wanted to make sure that our coaches and our staff, could identify signs of depression, signs of, alcohol or substance abuse. And so, some of those things that the coaches learned helped them during this time period. But, again, the coaches were going through this themselves, so we really had to rely on our campus resources, our community resources, each other, and identify, was anyone having, severe issues and really addressing them. We did. We had a lot of serious issues, over the last 2.5 years that we've had to rely on services from the community. But it was hard because, the parents are away from home, outside of when they came back. And, but that's, we're just a small aspect of the university. So even our, student affairs stepped in and really helped us, the same way they were helping all of our students on campus with some of these issues.
All of that, and then came masks. So, it's a simple thing. You either put it on and wear it or you don't. So how did that go over with your student athletes?
Well, one of the things with student athletes and just in general, we have their rules and guidelines. And so they're used to it. There's guidelines for NCAA rules in terms of eligibility and academic progress. So they're used to having direction and guidelines, rules that they have to, follow in their 4 years of competition. So that piece was not as challenging. Now it's a little bit more because they're more relaxed. I did get a few calls from different, department chairs that say, hey, can you get your kid, your student athletes to wear the mask in the building? And so in the beginning, it's not an issue. It is a little bit more challenging now, just because people have let their guards down because they're vaccinated, and the numbers are not so high. But now, of course, with the Omicron or whatever, we're having to kind of back into, a little more caution mode than before. And we still do have some student athletes that are not vaccinated. And so, we have taken a lot of precaution with that. We have more stringent testing requirement for them. They're getting tested 3 times a week on the most part, versus the ones that are fully vaccinated just once a week or twice a week if they're in season. And so still trying to work through that, but that's the only, one of the only saving graces we have, vaccinated or not, is to wear your mask.
So then how well have you been able to contain the virus? And if somebody has the virus, then what happens to them? Are they quarantined on campus? What's that process like?
So that was a tough process, and not just for NCCU, for everyone. It was really tough for our student athletes, our students in general, to be in a room for 14 days when this pandemic, when they were testing positive or close contact. We had, challenges with meals. We had challenges with, what do they do all day, because they only had an hour to grab as much stuff that they could out of their rooms before they went into quarantine or isolation. We helped with delivering meals, to our student athletes very early on. I used to send really pretty bad jokes, but they were funny to me, to student athletes that were in quarantine isolation, just to say, hey, I'm thinking about you. Here's something funny for you today. And so it was really a task trying to keep them engaged, and not sink into a place where, I can only imagine I could quarantine or isolate at my house and still be out here on my porch, but not in a 10 by 12, 12 by 12 room for 14 days. So it was tough. Later in the process, a lot of students that were having to quarantine for close contact, they were allowed to go home. So they actually went home for those 14 days. They still had to test on day 10, so that when they got ready to come back, they're not coming back still, positive or symptomatic. So now we have had very, very few since the beginning of this year. And so it seems to be more contained. And campus has done a wonderful job. Dr. Long, Dr. Coleman, their teams have done a magnificent job of keeping our campus rate down. And I think, the testing process that we have, a protocol, has really allowed us to contain it and manage it so much better.
So I want to go a little bit deeper into the NCAA rules about operation, like how students are expected to work during games, both home and away.
Right. So basically, we have an attestation form that we have to complete before we go to another school. And it basically just says that we have tested X number of times based on that sports requirement for the week, and that there are no positives. And so we send that to the school that we're going to. And the same thing happens when they come to our school. So for every sport, our sports medicine staff have to do that. So that kind of ensures that we're not sending someone on the road that's positive. Now that has been a challenge, and luckily, knock on wood, that we have not had to deal with the transportation issue, but that is something that we did put in place, that if someone is on the road, develops symptoms, and test positive while on the road, how do you get that student or staff member back without putting them on the same bus with everybody else? So those little kind of things we had to think about, in all of this process. But as far as the competition, each sport has pretty much their standard. So if it's an outdoor sport, they're not tested as much. So like a tennis or a golf, because you're really not in that close proximity to the other opponent. Last year, we had to cancel several games. I think men's basketball was in isolation or quarantine for about 52 days total. So, that impacted, of course, their season, because when you get out, every student athlete that is positive has to have a cardio workup. And if you can imagine, and, our team sports doctor is at Duke University, so they have sports too. So just trying to get our students in to get that workup so that we can get them back on the court, it's not been a challenge, but there's that protocol that they have to go through. So for the most part, the requirements for the NCAA and within the MEAC as well, because we had to come up with our requirements as well. they work really well. And so we've been able to keep our student athletes safe while they're traveling and during protocol. And even when they're traveling, no eating on the bus because they have to have their mask on. The buses have the guards and the shields, to a room, in which we've been doing that forever. But there were some restrictions while we're traveling. No eating together in the restaurant before now. Now that most of our teams are vaccinated, they're allowed to congregate and eat together. But even early on, there was no eating in the dining hall on campus. It was all grab and go for our student athletes back to their rooms so that they're not, exposed to, anyone that may be positive.
So I would like to say congratulations to you. I read very recently that Sports Illustrated and Empower Onyx put the spotlight on the diverse journeys of Black women across sports. And you were one of those who were featured in Elevate 100 Influential Black Women in Sports. How do you feel? That's amazing.
It is truly amazing. Michelle Wilson, who is the project, who's managing the entire project. And I actually had a chance to meet her in person last week, and she's a beautiful woman. And I did not know, I knew Sports Illustrated was a supporter of the project, but did not know that the article was actually going to be published on their online platform. So I was just blown away, very humbled by the writer's words. I mean, it was an hour and a half long interview via Zoom, and for her to capture, all of the things that were very important to me was amazing. And so I think this has been one of the most humbling but honors that I've had, in my career, just knowing how far and wide that platform reaches in terms of people.
And one more thing, you're leaving North Carolina Central University, and I would like to say just the fondest of farewells to you, and ask if you have any sentiments about your time here.
Well, I can only say that I have enjoyed all 28 years at North Carolina Central University. Just the aspect of the leaders that I have worked for and the support system to allow me to grow as a person. I am forever grateful to be able to be from Durham, a daughter of two people that graduated from North Carolina Central. So I really say I've been around North Carolina Central since, birth. So, but I'm then truly blessed. I think that's how I can really capture it all, just truly blessed and thankful for everything that NCCU has done for me and my family. And it is going to be tough, but, sometimes it's time to move forward and move on. And I'm excited about going to watch my daughter play volleyball at Norfolk State University and having that time to do that and, pursue some other things that will allow me to continue, hopefully having an impact on people's lives.
Thank you, Dr. Ingrid Wicker-McCree.
Thank you.
Yes, Director of Athletics at North Carolina Central University, for being my guest today. It has been my good pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, Kimberly, and I look forward to seeing and listening to the podcast. Thank you so much. It's an honor.
You're welcome. And thank you, audience, for watching via YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as listening on WNCU 90.7 FM. It's always our good pleasure. Be sure to like us. We want you to follow us. We want you to subscribe to our pages to see more of our archived shows. I'm Kimberly Pierce Cartwright, your host for COVID Conversations, and we'll see you next time. WNCU 90.7 FM cares about the community. We present COVID Conversations, a look at how COVID-19 is affecting our world. On Wednesday, December 15th, the guest is Dr. Ingrid Wicker-McCree. NCCU Athletic Director. We'll talk about the rigors of her position at North Carolina Central University and how she's led her division through COVID-19. We're member-supported WNCU 90.7 FM.